All right. Let's get this out of the way first. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed on Tailboard Talks Firefighter podcast are solely those of the speakers, guests, and host, and do not in any way represent the thoughts or views or opinions of any other employer, partnership, or sponsor. The material and information in this podcast is for general information purposes only. It should be used at the listener's discretion. Here comes the intro. Skip forward 30 seconds if you want to get right to the episode. This is the Tailboard Talk podcast, the best health, wellness, and lifestyle resource for the fire service. We're using stories, lessons, and tips from the front lines to give a realistic view of what the job can do to us and how we can make it out alive. I'm Chris Morella, a firefighter since 03, medic since 05, full-time since 08, and promoted to lieutenant in 20. I'm also a personal trainer and strength coach, and I'm here to give you the best information and host the best discussions to make us capable and durable, both on the job and away from it. So grab a heater, steal some fancy creamer from First Shift, and let's go chat. This is the longest intro ever. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. We are back.
Oh my God. All right. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Chris.
Oh my God, dude. So this is what happened last time too. I can't remember what. Oh, I kept messing up the name of the podcast. The last one recorded on manliness, manhood, stuff like that. Manliness and masculinity. I could not get the name of the podcast right when I started it because I was thinking of all my notes and stuff, and I kept saying like, "Oh, it's the 4-Shift Fitness Podcast," and I'm like, "Nah, that's not it." And then I said the old name of it, which was I haven't used that name in 3 years. The Tailboard Talks Fitcast, which is like super old. And then what am I doing? So it took me 4 times to intro the show correctly. So really, this is just status quo. It's great to have you back after your trip back to the green room. Anyway, let's start over. And I'm going to say what I already said and try to make it sound authentic. So I don't know much about you. Because I started looking into you and then I stopped because I didn't want to get on a track that somebody else had gotten on, or of course there's points that I want to talk about. I kind of sent you those before from our conversations before, but I really wanted to get to know you here and have a conversation. And like we talked about, it's risky, right? Because I don't know that much about you, and there's always a chance I say something dumb or extremely smart in my mind and extremely dumb in your mind, thinking of me, and then we get into a awkward conversation. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm hopeful it does sometimes, but let's just kick it off. So everybody knows who you are. Give me your background again, your elevator pitch again, and then we'll go from there and we'll be rocking and rolling.
The short little bio. All right.
Yeah.
My name is Vanessa Frost Piedrahita. I am a strength and conditioning coach by trade who's been working with firefighters since 2016. I am a mother of 2 young boys who are amazing and exhausting. I happen to be married to a firefighter as well, and I currently work for the Pflugerville Fire Department. And just a quick disclaimer in that anything expressed in this podcast are views of my own and not directly those of the department.
Perfect. So already I'm going in a different direction than I went last time because I have different questions already. Tell me about, we got the disclaimer out of the way. This is Vanessa talking. Tell me about Pflugerville and what you do there.
So I am the health and fitness coordinator here. Essentially, I describe it as like if a strength and conditioning coach and like a corporate wellness position had a baby, that is everything that I do. And so all things under health and wellness and fitness kind of umbrella, not including like your standard HR and insurance. That is not my boat, but specific like fitness related questions, educational related questions for all of our academies, fitness benchmarks that we conduct, station workouts, kind of all of those things fall under me, gym equipment and stuff like that.
Nice. What's, we're just going to kind of skip around.
Yeah.
What's your fitness benchmarks? You talked about that. You just mentioned that real quick. What does that look like?
Yeah. So we do quite a bit of testing here at our department. We do a VO2 max test during our annual medical physicals, which actually I don't conduct that testing per se, but in addition to that VO2 max, we have 4 fitness benchmarks. One that we call the annual physical assessment, which looks pretty similar to CPAT with just a few changes. a consumption benchmark, which is a double whammy of like it's our annual consumption drill as well as a fitness benchmark built into it, which came out of a kind of a lab in Canada that developed that. The NWCG pack walk, and then just a basic strength and conditioning assessment, which is like they get to run or row, do push-ups to a metronome, inverted rows. We do a mobility assessment, and so that one's actually coming up this summer, and it's the most quote unquote standard fitness assessment, just in terms of general strength conditioning versus like field tests.
Okay. How often do you do any one of those things?
Every 3 months. And so we do all of them on an annual basis.
Okay.
Quarterly, quote unquote, but depending on how the schedule works out, they might go back to back, but typically one within a quarter, not including our medical physicals.
Does your personnel think that's enough or too much or
I would say that
appropriate?
our personnel well, I both and. So I have conversation with some people who and definitely think it's way too much. And I understand it feels like a lot, and in terms of like just the stress of, oh, I have another fitness benchmark coming up, can be stressful for some people, especially depending on like how uh, let's see, habitual it is to maintain their fitness, right?
Yeah.
Now I have people on the other end of the spectrum who love it for a couple reasons. Either A, they love it because it makes sure that they know, like they keep themselves to a high fitness standard, and so it's a nice thing for them to feel like, oh, everybody else is also held to that standard. So in case I need them, like they can
Yeah.
help me, or B, they're not a liability, right? Um, or I guess those are the two, that it can help them maintain their fitness because they know, hey, I've got a fitness assessment coming up. I can't, like, you can't make up fitness in three
Right.
months, right? And so I have to maintain it on a personal level, and then be on like an accountability level, like, hey, the people I work with are also held to this standard, and so I
Yeah.
know that like we all have each other's backs essentially to a degree. And so it's a mixed bag, and depending on which fitness assessment coming up, like people sway towards one direction or the other, since everybody has their favorites.
I got to assume the VO2 max is the least appreciated one because I would only assume that's the
No,
hardest one.
I would say that our VO2 max is probably highly appreciated.
Really?
We do a maximum test on a bike. When they do it, and it's not an estimate, so it's a true VO2 max where they're actually getting their oxygen consumption measured, and their CO2 sent out, like actually measured. And I think because when it first started, people didn't love it. We were doing it on a treadmill, but now we've switched to the bike, and we've been doing it since I've been here. So this is our 7th year doing it, and like people get upset if they don't have all of their data from that, because they like to be able to look at it. And thankfully we have a really great company, shout out to Frontline Mobile Health, who works with us to always have not only a great experience in terms of like them coming in and setting all the things up, but they actually have conversations with our firefighters. It's not just your
Nice.
standard like hey, I'm going to spend 5 minutes with you as a provider and just be like, oh, your labs are okay, bye.
Yeah.
They spend 30 minutes with each of our firefighters on an annual basis, if not sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, kind of depending on who it is and what they have to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I do think that our VO2 max is actually the most widely appreciated if I were looking
Wow.
at all of them. The one that's probably least appreciated, I would say, in our case, is probably our pack walk.
What is that? I'm familiar with like the idea behind it, but I've never really administered one or been a part of one.
Yeah. So the way it's written is the NWCG. There's 3 different variations. To be honest, I'm not too familiar with the other 2 because our fire chief likes us to do like the hard version, which is
Excellent.
3. Yeah, it's 3 miles with a 45-pound pack, done in 45 minutes. So
Okay.
15-minute a mile with a 45-pound pack. And I think it's least appreciated because it's kind of one of those things that's unless you are used to walking quickly, it's difficult to walk quickly.
Sure.
Because somebody wants to jog or run. They're like, it's easier if I run. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Not so great on your joints.
Yeah.
and so that becomes difficult to people. And I think it, for many, it's like, well, we don't do that often. Like, we're not wildland firefighters. We have a take our wildland classes, and we even have a wildland task book, but they're not, I don't know, we don't get our red cards from it, if that's the appropriate verbiage.
Hmm.
But we do have a ton of grass fires here. Just, we have a bunch of farmland around us. And so some people get really upset about it. Like, hey, we're never walking 3 miles, which isn't true, because every time we have a big grass fire, I literally have people like, oh, I looked at my watch, I ended up walking over 3 miles. I guess you were right. And like, that's not all the
Yeah.
time, right? But it's like the one time you need it, it's there.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like everything you train for in the fire service. But
Kind of.
I
Yeah.
get it. It can be a lot of testing. And even up till this point, like, I had been the only one kind of conducting it. And so we're changing that model a bit, thankfully, just in terms of like having more people involved with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be a lot.
Okay. I only assumed the VO2 max was the least, I should say least enjoyable, just because it's so hard. Like
Mm.
physically it's demanding. And so you think that come up to that one and be like, crap, dude, I got to go for broke again in 3 months. I'm not looking forward to that. But the data side, yeah, it makes complete sense. Let's get into some loose training stuff, because I could talk about testing all day, but I think that's nerdy stuff that we should
Yeah.
talk about on the side. But um, one of the reasons I reached out to you to be on was because, it's always hard to be a prophet in your own land, and
Mm.
um, I think we have a lot of the same lessons and a lot of the same takeaways and stuff like that. But I always like to hear someone else's spin on it, or look at it. So I'm just going to go through some topics I kind of thought of while you were talking. What do you think about, what is the importance, or what is the purpose of an aerobic base for firefighters? Where would you put that in the hierarchy of physical needs?
I would put, I mean, in terms of the hierarchy, it's one of the first things I now work to develop, which is different from what it was in the past, to be
Yeah.
honest. When I first started, um, even just as a coach, like in general, even back in collegiates, all of my athletes kind of have an aerobic base to a degree. They've been practicing their sport for some time. And so I kind of got used to the model of like sharpening the upper end of the performance spear, if
Yeah.
we were going to go in that model. And so when I first came into working with the fire service, my main mission was movement quality, which to a degree it still is, because that's really how you get through a 30-year career, I think, without much musculoskeletal injury, which can be super detrimental. But I spend a lot more time building an aerobic base than I ever have before as a coach. I was actually just looking over some data, and we now run like 6-month academies where we get civilians off the streets and turn them into firefighters, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
I was looking through it because we have one coming up, and I have a breakdown of like how much percentage wise or even hours did I spend in building their PT program. And it was something like, I think I ended up spending like 20 or 32-ish% on strength. I think I spent like 29-ish% on aerobic capacity. That doesn't include what is classified there as like circuit training. That's
Okay.
literally running, rowing, biking, um, zone 2 walking with sandbags to some
Okay.
degree. And so it, I mean, I think it's really a half and half, but just depending on where you're starting them at, it's either more important or less important. I think the
Sure.
older you get in your career, the even more important it is, because I mean, we lose strength definitely as we age, but you need the constant stimulus of like conditioning, because
Yeah.
that goes way faster than strength does, for sure.
Yeah. Well, strength is stubborn, right? Like even if you lose muscle mass, you
Mm.
probably still have the linking there, and the kinetic linking and the movement patterns to leverage it to be successful anyways, with less muscle mass compared to what you used to have in your 20s, right? But yeah, the fickle beast that is cardio will abandon you quickly and never look back. And there's no remnant of that. I tell the guys, some of the new guys when we're coming on, I can't remember if I've used this before. Um, we have an established pure fitness model in my department, which
Hmm.
has its holes, has its flaws, but for what we're trying to do with it, it fits well for the little bit we do with it. And we're building a much better culture as we have new recruits in. We've hired a lot. Anyways, most people now are coming in with a pretty acceptable level of fitness. And I tell them, kind of the struggles of doing this for 20, 25, 30 years. And I compare it to like our SMOs or our FOG manual, which are Fire Ground Operations Manual. And it's like, if you ever get stuck on a medical call, if you ever get stuck in a pinch in your command, you have a resource there to look at. You can open the book and see what to do for asthma if you're really just blanking or whatever. Or if you can't remember how to structure a multiple patient or mass casualty incident, you have a checklist to go down. I said, but if you're asked to go to the 12th floor, there's no book you can open to give you more legs and lungs. Like, that's it. The only resource you have is someone else doing your job for you, which hampers the overall evolution in the operation then. So you are the only resource at the task level. Like, that's you. And you don't have something else to fall back on. So it's something that hopefully that drives the point home time and time again. And we are busy enough where occasionally you do get pinched of like, oh man, we got the job done, but that could have been a lot easier like 10 years ago. And that kind of centers everybody again. But yeah, that aerobic base to me is highly important. And I think, as you're saying, as I'm getting older, I'm 38 now, I lean towards it a lot more. I lean away from maxing out deadlifting or squatting, and I lean more towards some higher interval stuff, but definitely more the aerobic side of it.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of an important piece that has been missed in the fire service, and even those of us who work with the fire service, is like the ever-changing structure of a program from recruit on to ends of the academy, regardless, or not ends of the academy, ends of a career, regardless of position, to be honest. And that, like, I'm now kind of wrapping my head around this because I'm hosting a training for something similar to a peer fitness model within our department kind of later this month. And so I'm trying to distill like all of my thoughts down into, single slides that we can talk about.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what's cool about the aerobic base is you can gain it relatively easy, especially when you are younger. And so the amount of like quote unquote effort you kind of have to put into it in your younger years, I think, is less, and you still end up building it just because you adapt so quickly. That's really just everything, right? When we're younger, we adapt quicker. And then as we age, then we just have to put more emphasis on it because you just need it consistently a lot more. It's just going to go away. And that's kind of it's not new, but it's just something that I've been thinking about lately.
Have you had the opportunity to see many guys? So how long you've been with them since 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
So have you been able to see in 7 years people progress naturally from like I'm a power lifter, pseudo power lifter, high school power lifter kind of meathead, and then over the course of 7 years they're like, I used to like the bike for sprints and like high intensity stuff, but now I'd rather go for a 45-minute ride in like a zone 3, something like that, and that gives me more satisfaction than hammering down for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think I have seen that. And I've seen it done well, and I've seen it done not so well, in the sense that I've seen some people be like, yeah, I don't really lift heavy things anymore because they recognize they need that aerobic base, or they need to work on it to maintain it, right? But then the pendulum swings hard, and like we know that like if I'm on one end of the pendulum, like it's going to swing all the way to the other side, and now this person hasn't lifted more than 95 pounds in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan of the deadlift, and the deadlift when done well in its different variations. And I'm like, hey, we've got to pick up more than 95 pounds at some point over the next few months.
Right.
And so, yes, I've definitely seen it kind of happen naturally, which I like, even as I start to age, I'm like, oh, I notice things changing a little differently. But I think like we also need to remind ourselves that neither end of the spectrum is where we want to live. Like we need to be able to move between the kind of like 25 to 75% of either of those, just kind of based on likes. If we could live 50-50, that'd be great, but we're going to move towards one or the other.
I like it. So that kind of bleeds into another conversation that I have no idea where you stand. When someone says tactical athlete, do you have any reaction to that? Because I typically do.
I do. So I actually have I have a Post-it note that has been on my computer Or I guess technically my monitor. I've gotten a new computer for work, but not a new monitor. But it's been on there since I started, and it says firefighters are not athletes,
Oh
which
man.
may
All right,
like
cool.
I like I don't know. From what it seems, we probably have similar views on that, but I'm
That was a
sure
risky
like
one. Yeah.
when like I haven't posted about this on social media at all because I'm not ready for the pitchforks and like the fight about it.
Yeah.
But like I came from the collegiate athletics world. And so I'm not saying that firefighters aren't athletic. That is my argument. My
Right.
argument is that firefighters need to be athletic, but they don't need to be athletes. And what I mean by that is like if like it's a conversation I have with my firefighters about health versus performance.
Hmm.
Because if you're an athlete, your main goal, your only goal is essentially to win, right? Whatever sport you choose, your goal is to win the season, your goal is to win your career. And so people will be like, well, the argument is that firefighters are athletes because they want to maintain their careers. And I push back on that, being like, I don't know a competitive athlete who hasn't trained through injury on a high volume. Like
Yeah.
I've been a competitive athlete at a national level. I totally get it. And you do it because you love it. And so if people want to do that, I'm all for it. Like I'm all for people making their own goals and sticking to them. But I don't think for those who are kind of have the role and responsibility of being a coach and trying to inform a single firefighter or an entire department, be like, you guys are athletes, at least without any caveats of being like your performance isn't the only thing that's important, because I can give you short-term performance and you have a heart attack 5 years down the road because all we focused on was your ability to maintain your performance for 15 minutes on the fire ground. Like
Yeah.
that ain't it. But I also don't think, hey, we only need to just work on our health, because yeah, your jobs are physical demand, have a physical demand. And so I talk to my firefighters about the spectrum between health and performance. And that's kind of what I was like leaning towards earlier, is like, I need you somewhere between 25 to 75% on either end of those,
Hmm.
not living in either extreme. Because like as an athlete, you know exactly what's expected of you, you know exactly when that is expected of you. And it's pretty like singular and focus in that
Yeah.
aspect. Like, hey, we know that you're a tennis player and you get a ton of unilateral movement on one side only ever. Great. Guess what? I'm going to be spending a ton of time on unilateral movement on the other direction only
Yeah.
ever. And so I think firefighters are truly have the need to be athletic throughout their careers, but I don't like the term athlete. And maybe that's just like a my issue, not a like other people issue, but because I know the cost of athletics and as sport,
Yeah.
I don't think that firefighters should have to pay that cost.
Yeah. Well, I think where I get rubbed with it is it's an opportunistic term for in my mind, where
Yeah.
you can have someone demand something, demand whatever comes to mind because I'm a tactical athlete. But then if you follow that person while they're on shift or in their lifestyle, they're doing everything that an athlete would be directed not to do naturally. And so they want to be opportunistic with it, claim that they're an athlete. I need X, Y, Z because these are my demands as a tactical athlete. And they live 98% of their other life as a slot, as the person watching the athletes on Sunday, right? So I don't like it. I even have trouble with the tactical side because I think we like to make ourselves into things. Whole different discussion. I used to say in a presentation that the only thing tactical about us is that we would have pants on the side of our pockets and zippers on our boots. And beyond that, we're just guys that would work somewhere else if we didn't get a fire department job. Um, Anyways, it gets to like a disparaging point to me because people come to mind. I have past experiences with them. So it's fun when I go into departments and talk about that stuff, but I got to tie it back to something. But I really like your differentiation between being an athlete and being athletic because, yeah, you need strength, endurance, range of motion, movement quality, output, all that stuff, durability, which is shared with an athlete. But yeah, we're also athletes for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to realize that you can turn into the shape of an NFL lineman, but you're not retiring 6 years from now with a bunch of money and
Yeah.
brain trauma. So I understand it. I like it. I think it's maybe misplaced in terms of the fire service. I'm sure there's an area where it belongs. I'm sure there's an area maybe of the elite military or other things where it belongs, but I
Mhm.
think it's a misplaced term in the fire service by and
Yeah,
large.
I think too. And I think it's also very, I don't know, like, I feel like the people who classify themselves or even like to use the term of like tactical athletes in reference to firefighters are like those who want to be at the very, like, I don't know, top 3% of in the world of performance in the fire service,
Hmm.
which is totally fine. Like, if that's your main goal, but I don't think it's the message that needs to be spread to the fire service as a whole.
Yeah. Well, it's a strange balancing act, like you said. Like we did in 2011 or 12. We made a team. It was the third year of it. We did the combat challenge, the firefighter
Mm-hmm.
combat challenge. We did it 13 times, and we won the grand national championship. And I was down to like 100 and like 80 pounds, maybe 175 or 6 pounds. Um, and I was in great shape for a minute and 40 seconds. Like I could do the course and then go throw up in the porta potty and then
Yeah.
go drink beer. But if I had to put on the hotel pack and go up to the 11th floor, I was gassed, like going halfway up. And my
Mm-hmm.
sleep was terrible. And I felt like I had a cold all the time. So I was
Yeah.
a high performing athlete at that point for this specific task, but I was probably not any better than the average Joe on the fire ground because past 1 minute and 40 seconds, I was
Like,
like
not
hurting.
super
I
useful.
was hurting big time. Um, so yeah, it's a weird kind of thing. And then as I started putting on more weight again, and lessening my like extreme high end um, intensity stuff, I
Mm.
lost some of that. So I'm not as like explosive anymore, but
Yeah.
I'm far more like sturdy,
Useful.
if that makes more sense. Yeah, I'm far
Yeah.
more useful, sturdy. I can pace myself. I don't have a minute 45 gas tank anymore. So yeah, and even then I wasn't an athlete. I was a specialist, and then I wasn't tactical. I was playing a sport in the firefighter
Mm-hmm.
combat challenge, and then I had to go back and do my job, which was being sacrificed because of the chase of performance. So I get it. I like your explanation on it. Um, I think you're going to get roasted for it pretty hard.
I don't doubt it. I mean, this is technically the first time I've ever been public about that opinion.
Oh man.
I talk about it like at my fire department quite a bit, just because like people will like, come by my computer and be like, what is that?
Yeah.
And so we'll have a conversation about it. I'm all for having a conversation about it. I just think nuance and context really matter.
Yeah.
And I think that label just gets rid of a bunch of it.
Oh yeah. So what are some other things that coming in your first handful of years or even now as you're running more academies, what are some other things that people come in, they have preconceived notions of the fire service or ideas, and you have to be like, that's not really what that is, or that's not really what we're doing here. Or those conversations that are kind of the dogma that you have to go against. Is anything coming to mind in that one?
That all we need and all that we should do is high intensity interval training, which is slightly mislabeled. Um, but that's one that comes in, and like I've been public about this. Like love the world of like high intensity circuits. That's where I came from. My first group fitness classes were CrossFit classes. Um, Back when like knee high socks and headbands were cool. So that
Still
ages
are.
me a
That's
bit.
fine. Still
But
are.
yeah,
Bought two
still
fanny
are,
packs the other day.
sure.
It's fine.
um, but like the fact that some people think that's all that we should be doing, or even like I have cadets coming in and they come in on two ends of the spectrum. They either come in like ridiculously fit, which is amazing, um, but I hate to say this, but fitter than technically they need to be. And so
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to them doing that, right? I want you to shoot for whatever fitness level that you want, as long as you're fit enough to do the job.
Yeah.
And so they get upset to a degree when some people aren't. It's like two ends of the spectrum. They're either like not fit at all, and Lord, like I've got to get you there, or they're ridiculously fit, and then they're like, well, why aren't they fit? And so
Oh.
a couple of things come to mind of this. One is like the first thing I talk to people about when I get them is like I have three jobs in one. My bare minimum in terms of my job as a coach is for you to be fit enough for the job, because like the department pays me and you get paid by the department. And so like the bare minimum is that you're fit enough for your job. The next tier up from that is that you're fit enough to do whatever you think is fun in your life. And so we have quite a few people here who like love mountain biking. We have a couple people who compete in motocross. Like people who are very active in their life and they enjoy that. They love Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Just we have a couple like competitive CrossFitters, like whatever you want to do for fun, I want to help you be able to do that. And so if you are that person who plays a ton of tennis, then yeah, or golf, we have a couple golfers and they'd be like, oh, I have this back pain. I'm like, well, you're swinging in one direction for like 800 times in a day.
Yeah.
And so here, let's work on that. That's how we tackle your for fun, quote unquote, piece.
Yeah.
And so that's the second tier of the ladder. And then the third tier of the ladder is for life. And that's that balance. And I think the most difficult part between that health and performance that we just talked about of like, hey, that's great. I can make you amazing right now. But my goal is that you're amazing in 30 years and like you get to spend all of your money and in retirement and that you get to enjoy your family and your family gets to enjoy you for that long. And so that's where I bring the world of health outside of performance and that like as a coach, I actually give a shit about your relationships in life. But so that's kind of one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is like my challenge and a challenge for really anybody who's working with an academy or any group of people, like even a department, right, who has such a varied degree of fitness levels, like those people who can barely do 7 push-ups and then the people who are crushing it day in and day out is like, how do you run a program that is challenging and effective for everybody? Which was something I had to contend with. We ran our first like big group academy 2 years ago now. Yeah, 2 years ago. And that academy, we had 0 fitness standards to get in. We were just like, hey, if you're essentially a good person and like you test well and interview well, do all the things, then we'll get you to where you need to be.
Yeah.
And so I had 0 fitness standards, which like is fine because it helped us collect the data to establish our fitness standards.
Yeah.
But it was a challenge, but honestly really fun as a coach to be able to do that because we just split them up into groups. I bring in some contractors and like some firefighters to help me coach the different groups. And hey, you guys are my deconditioned group. Guess what we're doing? A lot more aerobic capacity work. Great. You guys are weak as F and can't, hold a ladder to save your life. You're going to be spending a lot more time in the weight room. And so I'm thankful that like I've had the resources to be able to do that. But
there's a comfortability of that, right? Because if you came from group classes, CrossFit classes, Gen Pop classes, that's right back to the people with a regular home life that you get to now break into this. You get to be the bridge between those two massive gaps, or in that massive gap that's been your foundations with Group X or Group Class, and then you get to show them the fire side, and that's a great way to ease them into it extremely harshly. One more buzzword that I came up in my brain when you're talking about CrossFit, high intensity interval stuff that's mislabeled. This is where this is going. When I say that, I'm glad you're sitting down. When I say the word Tabata, what does that make you feel?
I don't know if that makes me feel any specific way. I don't know that like in my day-to-day world, that's
good.
Particular, like people don't overuse that. Now, what drives me crazy and something like, oh, I did this Tabata workout and I did like 16 sets of Tabata, quote unquote, like 16 4-minute sets. And I'm like, no, you're kind of meant to do like one that's a go hard, go home.
So that's where I get hung up on is people be like, oh, I did 4 movements. I did Tabata squats. I was like, well, that can be tough. And then I did Tabata plank, and then I did Tabata step ups. I'm like, you lost it. Like you're just disgracing the name of Dr. Tabata at this point. Please don't say that out loud around anybody. And so that it does get overused by us a lot. Tabata is like just another word for high intensity or HIIT training or CrossFit. It's just an umbrella term for anything that you do. Yeah.
I think for some people, like I try not to fault people because for many, like we're kind of nerds, right? So we get that. But for many people, that's the common lingo.
Yeah.
And so I think at least with that one, because it's not used maybe nearly as much as it is in your world, that like, I don't come up in arms about it, but I do use it as like a teaching point of like, hey, if you're going all out, trust me, you can't do that 16 times. And so you're getting the benefit of going like medium out for a distance, like a certain amount of time. Not bad, right? But just what is your goal? And so if you want it to be effective for your goal, you might want to choose something else or implement it appropriately.
We had a hard stance with that when Kurt and I, the guy I bring a lot on here, when we were working at his gym, that was like a instant correction. Like we had to correct that because we're going to use it someday. And we want you to know what you're doing and not just go saying
Mm-hmm.
we're doing Tabata things. I will say now, not working at the gym anymore and just kind of do my own thing. If one of my guys is like, yeah, I did Tabata, whatever. I was like, oh, cool. You did like a 20-10 split. That's good. And they'll be like,
Yeah.
no, what? I'll be like, nah, don't worry about it. Just keep doing your thing, man. It's all
Yeah.
good. Do
You got
Tabata
it.
whatever you want. I'm glad you were there for 24 minutes or whatever. Ham it up, but definitely, I've talked about this before. Sue Falsoni had a course at Perform Better one year that was all about here's the things we say to the public, but here's what we should not be saying to each other as coaches. And it was awesome. It was like the coolest thing ever because she was like, we all know that you're not really, I can't remember what she said, like breaking up scar tissue, right? Like we all
Yeah.
know that. And half the room was like, yeah, of course. And the other half was like, breaking
Oh,
up
let me
scar
take
tissue.
notes.
And I was like, oh, let's see where this goes. That was like our opener. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be a good one. So I appreciate that very much. So where do you think, looking at a big picture, looking at the past 7 years, and you have large classes incoming, outgoing, you said that was kind of split into very fit people and highly unfit people, depending on
Mhm.
what your prerequisites are. In general, in the fire service, can you provide a landscape for the next 10 years of fitness? How are we doing? What are you noticing? What are some of our big
Yeah.
challenges going to be? How are you feeling overall, right?
Things have changed. I will say that what feels like the national landscape has changed a lot since I've been here. And so um, that is extremely promising. I think right now we're at a good point to where and even 7 years ago, everybody kind of knew that it was important to work out, quote unquote, in general. Um, but I think now that's more true than ever, and that most people are like, hey, again, most people are like, I don't care what you do anything. And I'm honestly totally okay with that
Yeah.
because consistency rules supreme, right? Before anything else, we got to be consistent. Don't care if it's in Zumba, don't care. Somebody sent me this reel the other day who I think was like from fire department coffee or whatever. There was like a,
Yeah.
excuse me, that like bungee jump class or whatever.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah. Of
So
course.
like absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Love it. And of course, people are like pointing out in the comments, like, have you ever tried it? It's so much fun. Like, that's like, I can appreciate that both are true.
Yeah.
That, like, if that's the only thing you've ever done, and or the only thing you're going to do, if it's that or nothing, do that.
Right.
Right. But the more effective we want to be, the more that changes. And so I do think that that message of like, hey, do anything is out there. And I think that the budget lines are now starting to be out there, which I think is really important at a fire service level. When we
Yeah.
start seeing budget line items go to health, fitness, performance, whatever you want to call it, wellness. I kind of use health and wellness interchangeably, but then that makes a big difference. I think where things are starting to shift is that now more people involved in the strength conditioning world are recognizing that the fire service kind of exists to a degree and like, oh,
Yeah.
we should help those people. Um, and so I think for a long time, people with really good intentions have been the spokespeople, which is not a bad thing. But I do think that people with good intentions and some background knowledge is like the best combination.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to see more and more in them specific to the fire service, which I
Nice.
think is really promising. Always work to go because, like, we're still, 20 years behind the military in terms of resources giving out. And we have a lot of the same issues in terms of that. But I like it's promising. I think the fact that people are establishing you need an aerobic base is out there, and like I said, like I'm part of that switch as well within the last 7 years. Not that it
Yeah.
wasn't important, but that it's even more important now, especially as, at least in my world, my fire department ages.
Yeah.
Like we're a relatively young fire department, and so I'm now, when I showed up, most people were in kind of their 30s, young 40s, and now we're reaching quite a few people are up into their later 40s and into their 50s, which we didn't have a single 50-year-old in my fire department when I showed up,
Really?
other than like the fire chief
Oh,
and the
wow.
assistant fire chief. Like everybody on a truck was not in their 50s, and
Wow.
that has since changed. Not, I mean, it's not like we have like everybody switched from 49 to 50, but
Yeah,
now we
yeah.
actually have a true spectrum between like we've got some 18-year-olds and we have like two handfuls of people that are sitting in their young 50s. And so um, I think as that, at least in my world, sticks around, hopefully in the fire service world in general, like the nuance behind health and performance is starting to be spoken about more.
Nice. Wow, it's pretty. I mean, it's an astounding thing that you didn't have anybody over 50 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I feel like that's very similar to what we're going through. We have about 140 people, and a third of the department is under 5 years now.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
Or
we're
under,
literally in the same boat.
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
great because they're. I keep telling them like you guys, this will be your department in 10 years. Like you guys have the opportunity to take this, whatever vision you have, whatever romantic thing you have of this department, you can actually make that happen. Like you're not going to be stifled at all. So whoever wants to lead and make this happen, go for it. So with that, then I have a wrap up option. Do you have anything else you want to talk about real quick before I pose a final?
No, I think we covered a good variety. We'll just have
We
to
did.
come back and hit part two at some point
Okay.
in 6 to 8 months, you know.
My next availability.
Yeah.
So since we have relatively similar departments, I want you to pretend like you're coming to my department now. Okay.
Okay.
So don't worry about talking to your guys or
Mhm.
your chief or anything like that. I've hired you. You're coming to my department. We have 140 people. A third of them are young, and it's kind of third.
Okay.
You did the presentation and went amazingly, obviously, and now you're wrapping up, right? And so you have something to leave this group with, and it's everybody. Everybody bought into it. The chief paid for everybody to show up on their own time. We're all here, and you get to put the stamp on the end of this day, right?
Okay.
It's something you prepare months for typically, and you have 3 seconds. Go ahead.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think if I'm imagining this giant room of all y'all and your little Zoom faces while you're at the station, right? I'm going to say that it is, regardless of what the department does, and that I'm super thankful that the chief brought me in. Like I think it speaks like amazingly of them that they're willing to put their money where their mouth is if they're saying that your health and your fitness and your wellness is all important. Ultimately, that decision is yours. I think that if you don't find the value in trying to maintain your health span of letting you live as long as humanly possible, if you don't find the value in that, no matter the resources given to the department gives you, it won't matter. Because no, even if people with really good intentions and a lot of great knowledge are coming to you, it is your responsibility to take that and run with it to whatever degree you want. And so whether or not you're the person who's like, hey, all I can commit to is 30 minutes of walking 5 days a week, I'm all for that. If you're the person who says, hey, I've got 90 minutes of training that I can do 5 times a week, and I'm going to be diligent about my sleep and my caffeine intake and all those things, and you want to push yourself towards the end of the spectrum of the fire athlete, quote unquote, I am also all for that. But I think you need to remember what's most important, not only at the time. So if it's at the time and like you can't make it up a flight of stairs or 5 flights of stairs in a building without huffing and puffing, then that's what's important right now. Let's figure out how to do that. But in the long run, your ability to have a healthy career and a healthy life are both ridiculously important. I think it's a shame for anyone to spend their year serving their community and the public and not also serve themselves to a degree, which I know is so like many firefighters don't even think about that, right? Because, you know, we're all about the fire service and giving to others, but you can't give to anybody else if you don't give to yourself first and take the responsibility for your health and wellness and play that out. And so consistency is king. After that, you can add volume and intensity. And as long as you're making like the next best decision, whatever that is for you, for your health and performance, then you're in the right direction.
Wow, and everybody stands up. Everybody starts cheering. Vanessa, Vanessa, Vanessa. They carry you out.
I like this room. I need to go there more often.
Great room. You know why? Because it doesn't exist. That's why it's so great, because I get to make it whenever I want. In reality, we invited the department, and me and 2 other people are sitting there taking
Yep,
notes.
and everybody else is on their phone. And
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. Or like, oh, I got busy. I had a softball game or something like that. Bowling. That was awesome. That was awesome, and it's perfect. And thank you so much for taking on that challenge. I think you're right. I think that's a good place. We're 45 minutes in, not too much to edit out at all, really. I think it's smart to end here.
Yeah. Without
Listen
the
to
internet
it.
cutting out on
Think
it.
of all the things that we could have said better, and then have another one down the road here pretty soon.
I think that's great.
Awesome.
I
Well,
love
thank
that
you
plan.
so much. If people want to get in contact with you about your job or you or anything, where can they find you?
The easiest place to find me is probably on Instagram at Firefighter Strength Coach. And then if you want to talk like official department things and kind of what my department does on an official level, I'll give you my email from there and we'll do that. But Instagram is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Best way to ignore people too, right? All right.
Yeah, right?
Terrible for scheduling though, I'll tell you that. I have your phone number now, so it'll be much
Yeah,
easier.
perfect.
Oh my God. All right. Well, thank you again. Let me do my quick pitch real quick. Yeah, we'll link it on there. If you guys like the show, like what's going on, you can always go to the show page and hit the buy me a coffee button. I'm going to buy Vanessa coffee when I see her next, or I'll send her a gift card. Don't worry, we'll be going to her. But if you like the episode, like the show, please feel free to donate. It just helps us keep the show going and everything. So until next time, let's all keep working to be more capable and durable, both on shift and away from it, and be a 4-shifter. We'll talk to you soon. Yeah, that's it.
Awesome. It worked out.